For organizing and for including me in this conference. When I did take advantage of the retirement package that Lewis and Clark was offering, Dean Klonoff kindly said to me, "Oh, we'll still get you to India someday." And I thought it was a lovely thing to say, but I didn't really think it was that likely. And I was so excited when Lucy called me a few months ago and asked me to this conference. So I'm thrilled to be here. And Navneet was one of my very own students when I was on the law school faculty when he was there for his LLM, so I'm thrilled to see him in this role as well. Okay, yesterday we started at the global level with Professor Wolf's presentation. We sort of came down through the day yesterday through Central Asia, on the ground in India, South Africa. I think the smallest scale we got to was the Plakimata situation. I'm going to bring us even further down to a particular case study, somewhat localized, but of great significance because of the reach of the ecosystem that's involved in this case study. And I hope it has broad implications and relevance, even though it's a very specific part of the country. Here's the setting. The setting for the case study is the Pacific Northwest, and I apologize to those of you who are going to know some of this. We have a few Pacific Northwesterners here, and not very many other folks. I was thinking I'd be educating a lot of Indian law students, so this is somewhat elementary. But the setting is the Pacific Northwest. This is sometimes this region, Oregon being right smack in the middle there on the west coast, and Canada, the British Columbia province of Canada included. Sometimes this is called, somewhat facetiously, the Republic of Cascadia. And it's really an ecoregion. It has an identity as an ecoregion because of the connected ecosystems. This area is big rivers, big trees, really, really big trees. Lots of rain in the western part, but very arid in the eastern part of this ecosystem. However, it's still one connected ecosystem because of these gigantic river systems that reach far inland and go all the way to the ocean. And this is where salmon are king. This slide requires the warning, the opposite of what's on your little mirror in your car. These are bigger than they look in this photograph. The objects on the slide are actually further away than they appear because these are giant fish. And they're giant in more ways than one. Another name for Cascadia is Salmon Nation, and this is in fact a term that is used. Salmon are not just fish. First of all, there are 8 different kinds or species of salmon: coho, pink, chum, king, chinook, etc. But more than that, they're a cultural icon and a regional point of pride, a very serious mascot, and I mean that in a serious way, not a flippant way, a way of life, and they're a canary in the coal mine as well. Why are they so significant? Well, because they're pretty amazing animals. I know it's hard to think of a fish as an animal, but they're amazing animals because they're anadromous, and most of you know this, but that means that they're born in inland rivers, they migrate downstream to the ocean, they mature in the ocean, sometimes for a few years. Then, however, they migrate back home. They find the place of their birth, the stream of their birth, far, far inland in these river systems, and that's where they spawn and die and begin the cycle again with the new eggs creating the new fish. They journey thousands of miles through hundreds of obstacles, and this is the range. I mean, so from the inland rivers of Pacific Northwest, you have this migration pattern that it takes in the entire North Pacific. They have natural obstacles: predators, waterfalls, rapids, terrible ocean conditions, or widely varying ocean conditions. But in the last several decades, they've had some incredible artificial obstacles as well. Big dams, fishermen, bad stream conditions inland, many more obstacles have been put in their way. The salmon sustained the native population of the Pacific Northwest for thousands of years, and they're still incredibly important to the regional and even the world economy because of this significant range that they occupy. Just in the North Pacific, the commercial harvest alone is hundreds of millions of fish for hundreds of millions of dollars. And then if you look further into the tribal and recreational fisheries and the many associated activities that go along with those fisheries, you have even more economic benefit. And they're integral, in addition to being significant economically, they're integral to this entire ecosystem and the other flora and fauna. They support creatures from the top of the food chain, I mean man, for instance, but also bears and raptors and larger creatures, and at the very bottom of the food chain, because when they die in the inland stream systems, they provide nutrients to the streams and to the surrounding area. So they're really a very important piece of the whole ecosystem. And because of their range, that ecosystem extends throughout the North Pacific Ocean, as well as far into the Pacific Northwest interior. And because of their migration, they inhabit different areas at different times during their life cycle. They spawn in one place, they rear in another place, they migrate through other places, they mature in another place. And because of that, the fish really are indicator species, or canaries in the coal mine, as I said, because they're tied closely to the health of all different parts of the ecosystem and the many sub-habitats that make up that ecosystem. So in the Pacific Northwest, and we've mostly been talking about people so far, but in the Pacific Northwest, realizing the goal of water for life means ensuring, or includes ensuring, clean, cold water to support both the natural and human economy, and the salmon are really a proxy for achieving that goal. So when we're talking about salmon, we're talking about clean, cold water for all of the purposes that we want it for, both naturally and economically. In many millennia ago, salmon were tremendously abundant. Millions and millions of fish in and out of these vast inland river systems throughout the North Pacific year after year after year. But with dam building, because when you have big rivers, they're so attractive for dam building. So with dam building and urbanization and water diversions, water pollution, overfishing, they've dwindled dramatically over time. Oops. Okay. I think I hit the off button by mistake, sorry. And in fact, some runs have gone extinct. This slide just shows coho, one of the 8 major species of salmon. And you can see with the deep red, those runs are extinct already. We've done them in. Now that gives rise to a sort of a side issue, which is that hatcheries have been used to replace some of these fish runs, and that in itself is a source of controversy. Are hatchery fish the same as wild fish? Do they compete with wild fish? All those issues become part of the political landscape as well. But in any event, you can see that just with coho, there's some significant concern, even beyond the ones that have gone extinct, and all the other runs nearly all the other runs are in significant trouble as well. Dozens, I think it's 28 at last count, of specific runs have been listed on the United States Endangered Species List as either threatened or endangered. Now, because this fish is so important and such a proxy for all these other issues, there has been lots and lots of work done to restore them. I mean, this is not a new problem. This is something that's been arising and emerging and growing over the years. And dozens of government agencies and NGOs have been working on this problem to try to restore the fish habitat and the fish for many, many years. But think about what that means. If you've got significant systems of hydroelectric dams, flood control dams, all the development that has taken place in this part of the world runs contrary to restoring the salmon habitat in many cases. And not surprisingly, we've had little success to date, in spite of all these efforts. We have no recovered runs, with lots of listed runs, no recovered runs. So the case study that I want to spend a little more time talking about starts with 2 of the fairly minor players in this restoration effort, but 2 very active NGOs, the Oregon Trout and Oregon Water Trust. Oregon Trout was an organization that, and if you think of these 2 groups as fish and flow focused. So Oregon Trout was formed in 1983 specifically to help native fish and particularly the salmonid runs. It was a fairly traditional conservation organization. Public outreach, education, media activity, advocacy in the state legislature, the federal legislature, and occasionally litigation. But they were also very much an on-the-ground entity, and you can see an example of the kind of work that they did where habitats were restored from degraded conditions to much healthier conditions for water and for fish. And they were also became well known, they patented a software program called Stream Bank, which was intended to expedite the process of stream bank restoration, make it easy for a landowner to plug into all the sources of funding and the kinds of permits. It's sort of a one-stop shopping software program to get more projects done more quickly. It's been called the TurboTax of habitat restoration. Meanwhile, in 1993, the Oregon Water Trust was started. It was an organization I was very privileged to be involved with from day one. And our effort was to work on flow restoration. Fish need water, all kinds of things need water. And we were using a different approach, not the traditional conservation approach, but market environmentalism, where we were trying to go out and buy water from consumptive water users and put it back in stream to restore stream flows. Because in many, I'll describe that. In fact, I should probably do that right now. For those of you not familiar with Western water law, and we now have at least a few people I know who aren't, you might wonder, why would you need an organization to buy water and put it back in stream? Sounds like a crazy idea. Well, because we have a system of what's called prior appropriation doctrine in the Western United States and in many other arid countries around the world as well, where in water-scarce areas, the first entity to grab the water, to appropriate and divert the water from the stream and put it to some productive use, which means out of the stream, is the one with the superior right to that water. And it becomes a sort of property right. And in times of shortage, and in a dry area, shortages occur every single year. It's not an occasional drought. It's every summer there's a shortage, and you have dry streams like this one on the top of the slide. The junior users have to stop using cut back all the way until there are however many senior water rights holders have water that they can use. If there's, however much there is, that's the only folks that get to use it. So that's a situation where for 50 or more years in parts of the Western United States, many streams have been over-appropriated. They've had more people using water and acquiring water rights than there is water in the stream. And every single summer, in many parts of the Western United States, you have these totally dry stream flows. Well, if you're a fish, trying to survive, and particularly trying to migrate your way back from the ocean up to your inland spawning area, that's not a good thing. That's like a major detour, broken road situation. So that's why, under the law, we were forced to consider creating this organization that would actually buy water rights from the consumptive users who have them as a property right, and then turn them over to in-stream rights and put them back into the stream for fish. Now, in 2009, because of the frustration, we were both doing good work. Oregon Chapter and Oregon Water Trust were doing great work, but we weren't making a whole lot of progress. It was a dent or a tiny drop in the bucket. So in 2009, the two groups merged and became the Freshwater Trust. The whole point was to achieve greater impact by putting these two tools together: the habitat restoration and the stream flow restoration itself. Now, according to our executive director, our mission is to fix all the rivers on the planet. And if there's anybody who can do it, he can do it. He's an amazing guy. But with less hyperbole, what we were really trying to do is just get some synergy out of these two different kinds of approaches, to do more and better work, and to increase our scope into Cascadia, if you will, beyond just the boundaries of Oregon. You notice that the Oregon disappeared from both of the organizations' names. We have accomplished some synergy. We have been able to do more and better work, even since 2009. But the rivers and the fish are still struggling. We haven't really made a dent either. And without increasing our effort by orders of magnitude, we're never going to fix all the rivers. You know, not in Oregon, not in the Columbia River Basin, not the Pacific Northwest, not the United States, or North America, certainly not in the world. Without increased scope and scale, we'll never catch up with what needs to be done. So the Freshwater Trust and other entities in this region are evolving further by adding a completely different tool to our toolbox in the form of water quality trading. So what is water quality trading? Well, first of all, it assumes that there's an enforceable water quality goal for a body of water. There has to be, you know, a requirement that you need to get to a certain standard of water quality. It recognizes that different pollution dischargers are going to face different costs to comply with that standard, or that regulation. It's not going to cost everybody the same to do whatever they need to do to comply with the regulation. And water quality trading allows the dischargers to bargain with each other. So those with the higher pollution costs can bargain, you know, to help out those with lower pollution costs, or to do their work, perhaps, to achieve the required pollution reductions overall. So the idea being that it achieves the same overall water quality improvement at a lower overall cost, because you're allowing the market to sort of operate to find the least cost solutions to water quality improvement and to help do the job. Now, it can be used to apply, this term, water quality trading, can be used to apply to any number of different types of transactions. You know, the basic idea being just to harness the market to find the least expensive ways of making the water quality improvements. And it might be a, thank you, it might be a particular pollution discharge facility going directly to another polluter that has a lower cost. You know, two point source polluters, for instance, and one of them could go to the other one and bargain to get the reduction by the cheaper means. Or it could be, and this is where this particular case study comes in, could be protecting or restoring riparian areas or wetlands or floodplains, you know, aquatic habitat in general, to reduce the impact of pollutants. So harnessing the natural system as opposed to just dealing between two technological solutions. And essentially what this becomes is a trade between a point source and a non-point source, like, you know, non-point source being diffuse pollution like agricultural runoff, timber harvest runoff, stormwater from urban areas, those sorts of things. And it's that area that the Freshwater Trust is working in. And particularly, what we're doing is trading temperature improvements created by shade for temperature improvements that would otherwise have to be generated by artificial cooling. So we're achieving the goal of temperature reduction for effluent. You know, once again, if you think back to what I said before, you have to have an enforceable standard. You can't discharge more than this kind of pollution, and the water can't be any warmer than this. You have to have that goal, and then you're achieving the goal of temperature reduction for effluent by planting trees to cool the receiving water rather than cooling the wastewater directly prior to discharge. So it's a way of using ecosystem services, a way of using natural ecosystem processes to treat pollution in lieu of technological processes. And in fact, it's a lot easier to prevent the stream from heating up than it is to cool it down once you've let it heat up. So it's a great use of natural processes. Now, quickly, because there are now a few people in the room who wouldn't be familiar with the United States law, let me just say again, why is this necessary, or what's the context in which it works? As many of you may know, the United States has a very comprehensive water pollution regulatory scheme. And the structure is an example of cooperative federalism, a little differently than the kind of cooperative issues that we heard about yesterday, in which regulation is shared between the federal and the state levels. Federal law mandates a certain number of basic requirements, but then delegates the implementation of the law to the states. And among other things, the Federal Clean Water Act requires pipe dischargers, point source dischargers, including municipal wastewater treatment facilities, to get permits regulating the amount and the components of their discharge, and they're called National Pollution National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits. They're issued for 5-year periods. And at a minimum, the NPDES permits will include conditions that specify minimum technological requirements for treatment, such as secondary treatment for municipal sewage, best available technology for certain other forms of discharges. On the other hand, so we have this very tight system of controls on point sources in the United States. On the other hand, non-point sources have been completely ineffectively regulated under the Clean Water Act. And so water quality really suffers these days, not so much from point source discharges, but from non-point source pollution. The Clean Water Act also requires the states to establish water quality standards and criteria for all of their water bodies based on designated uses for those water bodies. And then they have to identify all the water bodies that are not meeting the standards they have laid out. This is just Oregon, and it's an example of water quality impaired streams. So this many streams in Oregon. Oregon has lots and lots of streams and rivers, but these are those that have water quality limited problems. And then the states need to establish what's called total maximum daily loads to try to get these streams back into compliance with the standards. And the total maximum daily loads then start to be allocated among the various polluters. They say, okay, we need to crunch down the pollution that's going on. Here's what you folks, point source, need to do. Here's what non-point sources need to do. Here's what needs to happen. Excuse me, let me back up for a minute. So these are all the streams that just the state of Oregon is working on. And you'll notice there's a big area in there with no red. That's because there's no water in there. That's the high desert part of Oregon. So it's not that it's clean, it's just that it doesn't have as much rivers to be dirty. Okay, so the issue then becomes, I mean, here's the example of the tight standards. And the issue then for the permit holders, many permit holders for the NPDES permits in the Pacific Northwest and elsewhere, I said they're only 5-year terms, they're coming up for new permits at a time when these TMDLs have been adopted and are imposing even stricter limits than they've had to live with before. So permit holders are faced with very expensive, the need to do some very expensive pollution control to comply with the more stringent requirements. In the Pacific Northwest, in this salmon nation, heat is a significant pollutant. And about 90% of the water quality impaired streams have heat as a significant problem. And some of the point source dischargers would have to reduce their heat discharge by 90% in order to meet the new standards. Well, that's phenomenal, and this creates the environment for water quality trading. You have strict standards, you have some folks who are going to have to take very expensive measures to comply with the standards, and then you have these other folks, the farmers primarily, who have been relatively untouched by the Clean Water Act requirements and have a lot of low-hanging fruit that could be, that could help water quality. And at a much, much lower cost than it would be for the point source dischargers. So this is what led to the pioneering efforts of not only the Freshwater Trust, but a couple of other entities in the Pacific Northwest to do water quality trading. Here's how it works. The city of Medford, in this particular trade, we have a municipal entity. It's in the southwestern part of Oregon. It's a fairly small city, about 75,000 in population, although about 200,000 if you look at it sort of as a metropolitan area. And it's one of the many municipal entities that has to reduce its, do something with its wastewater effluent to obtain its new discharge permit. It discharges its treated wastewater to the Rogue River, which is a very important salmon habitat river. It's a very important recreational river. Aesthetically, it's a beautiful river. And under the total maximum daily load that's been adopted for the basin, the State Department of Environmental Quality has said that the city itself can only raise the water temperature by 0.1772 degrees Celsius. So under low flow conditions, the city would exceed this waste load allocation by more than 200 million kilocalories per day. And under projected growth, population growth, it would go up to 400 million kilocalories per day. Now, don't ask me to do the conversion between kilocalories per day and degrees in the stream. I can't do it, but just know that it's a lot. So the cities looked at its alternatives. It would cost it about 16 to 20 million to do a chiller, essentially, a cooling tower or cooling facility of some sort. It would cost us nearly that. It would cost them nearly that much to do cooling ponds. However, if they could get the farmers along the Rogue River to plant trees and shade the river, it would cost a fraction of that amount. So the city issued a request for proposals because this water quality trading thing was starting to be talked about in the state environmental agency, and they had already done a pilot with another entity. It was in the wind, so to speak. So Medford issued a request for proposals for a trading partner because they didn't want to go out and deal with a whole bunch of farmers on their own. And they wanted someone to help them meet their cooling requirements at a lower cost. So eventually, they negotiated a deal with us at the Freshwater Trust. So the NPDES permit, takes several parts to put this kind of a trade together. The permit from the State Department of Environmental Quality allows tree planting to meet the temperature standard. So first, the agency has to say, we're not going to make you put in a chiller. We want you to meet the goal, but how you meet it is optional. And in particular, we will allow you to do shade as the alternative. The city then has a written contract with the Freshwater Trust for us to deliver that mitigation, to get the trees planted and get the shade delivered. The Freshwater Trust contracts with the individual riparian landowners to take some of their land out of production and plant trees instead in the riparian zones. And we're shooting for twice the necessary cooling. It's a huge margin of error. Now, this last point is one of the keys. There's a third-party certifier who then verifies that the required number of trees are planted before the Freshwater Trust gets paid and to certify to the agency that the city is in compliance with the permit. Now, there's an important piece, whoops, let me back up for just a second. There's an important piece that I need to describe here. This is not a one-time deal randomly negotiated by the parties, and this is critical to a functioning water quality trading system. The State Department of Environmental Quality, with help from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency and other interested conservation organizations, and particularly a group called the Willamette Partnership, which is another NGO. This group has been working for several years to come up with the protocols, the counting units, the currency, if you will, to make this kind of a deal work. So, and I don't have a slide for that because it would be a lot of people sitting around in a room, with a calculator and some scientific formulas. But what they have done is come up with a way to first measure the baseline of the warming quality of a particular water body. Then they're measuring what it would take in terms of tree planting, a mix of species, a canopy width, a canopy height, the angle or the aspect of the stream to the sun, all these very complicated things, going into coming up with a very precise protocol of units. How many units of, how many trees do you need to plant to get the units of shade you need, to get the kilocalories you need to get the temperature improvement in the river. So it is not, this sort of touchy-feely guess as we go thing. It's a very concrete modeling process. Now it's a model, which means that we don't know for sure if it's going to work. So there's also maintenance and monitoring and these certification requirements built in over time. But it's a really exciting thing. So far, heat is the one that's sort of at the highest level of development, the protocol and units for heat. We're also working on nutrients of various sorts, ammonia, BOD, phosphorus, all the things that make a difference to water quality, particularly when it gets out into the ocean and starts creating dead zones. So we're trying to work on those things too. So there will be a number of different currencies developed over the next few years. So quickly then, let me just sort of summarize the benefits of this kind of a deal. You're focusing on the water quality goal. You're not focusing on the means. You're not saying you must chill, you must put, although that's good advice, generally it's kind of like breathing, right? Okay. It's not specifying how somebody needs to reach the goal, it's focusing on the goal itself. It's flexible. It allows the market to operate. It allows the parties to seek the least cost-effective methods. It's also cost-effective. And it really encourages using green infrastructure. Instead of thinking technology, how could we restore stream processes to get the same benefit? It's scalable and transferable. And once you've started to develop some agreed upon currencies or agreed upon units and protocols, then you can take this from one place to another, and another place to another. It can go broader in terms of location and scope. And it's not just temperature. I mean, once you've created streamside habitat like this, you've got habitat, you've got flood storage, you've got filtration, you have aesthetic benefits, you have many more benefits by planting streamside buffers than just cooling down the stream. Now, it's not without criticism, and one of our own alums, a woman who has a small environmental organization in Portland who has created a lot of environmental law with her lawsuits over time. She's already starting to challenge, she hasn't filed a lawsuit, but she's starting to challenge this because it's experimental and untested. And this particular organization also believes it's sort of rewarding the farmers. Now we're going to pay the farmers to put things back that they destroyed originally. But it wasn't against the law for them to do what they did. And it isn't required under the law that they do any improvements. So we do sort of have to buy their cooperation. And the other thing is that it's a long timeline for success. Trees, even in the Pacific Northwest, trees don't grow overnight, although they grow pretty darn fast. But it will be considerable length of time before we know if this has really worked. But that's why we've got built in the year-by-year monitoring and certification requirements to make sure that it's on track. And it is already. With this particular deal, we've already signed up several landowners. Eventually, it's going to be 40 miles of streamside riparian vegetation. It could involve as many as 200 landowners, but we're on track because we're offering some, pretty decent money. So this deal between Medford and Freshwater Trust, for less than $8 million, we're going to get the same benefit of cooling that would have cost $16 million for a chiller and close to that for some other technological method, and those wouldn't have given any ancillary benefits whatsoever. So I don't want to, this is my last slide, but I don't want to end on this slide. I want to come back to the benefits and just mention that we are really excited about this as an NGO involved in this effort. And we believe that it is something that's going to be translated around the country. We already have almost a $1.5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to work on putting together a trading protocol that involves Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. So we're already expanding beyond the Oregon State Environmental Agency. We believe that these benefits are achievable and that overall we're going to get better water quality and ancillary benefits at a lower cost. Thank you.